Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Reputation Room. Today, I have someone with me who has a fascinating biography. He's born in Germany to Iranian parents who fled the Islamic Revolution. Raised in New York, back to Germany for university, where he studied political science, English linguistics, and public law. His career has taken him from a German political party to Goldman Sachs, through over a decade in financial services, then into one of Europe's biggest media houses, and most recently to one of the most exciting brand stories in global sports, On. With me being a runner and an On fan, I'm particularly excited about this one. Beyond all that, and acknowledging we've only spoken a couple times before today, I want to say that he strikes me as a remarkably warm and kind human being. He is Adib Sisani, Chief Communications Officer at On. His scope includes communications and public affairs, and this is the question he's always asked himself in every job he's had. What does reputation mean for this company, and how do we maximize the ability for comms to drive it? Adib, welcome to the Reputation Room.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you.
Let's get down to business. Adib,
Yes.
born in Germany, raised in New York, then university in Heidelberg, careers across Frankfurt, Berlin, and now Zurich. Where are you actually from, Adib? Does that matter at all?
It's a very good question. In the past, I would have always said, I've spent so many formative years and such a formative time in New York that I would always consider myself a New Yorker. And I still have family there. I love to spend time there. But now having a family, a small son, a dog, and my gorgeous wife, it's kind of where they are is where home is. And so now, thankfully, we're calling Zurich in Switzerland home after spending a lot of years living in Frankfurt, working in Berlin, also Düsseldorf in between for several years. So yeah, I've been kind of all over. So you really get to a point where you consider home where your loved ones are.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I would say that is very much Zurich.
I couldn't agree more with that. I've been in Barcelona, then Madrid, then Chicago, now Basel, and I'm with you that where family is where home is, right?
Yeah, it's what it comes all down to.
Good. So speaking of family, your parents left Iran during the Islamic Revolution. That's not a neutral biographic detail. It's a political education before you ever set foot in a party office, right? And how much of what you know did you absorb at home before you learned it professionally?
I definitely have to say that my parents, actually the small correction that I would make is they left before the Islamic Revolution.
Okay.
And then ended up, they were students in Europe, and they ended up having to stay and not being able to go back, given the Islamic Revolution. So my parents always instilled in me a lot of values that have come very much to my advantage in my personal life and in my professional life. My mother specifically was very adamant about, not only in education, but really having a very significant drive in life. So did my father, of sort of being very driven and making something of yourself. And you mentioned sort of the political angle. Yes and no. Obviously, it's kind of from very early on in your life, you get to know things that you would hope that nobody ever would have to know or experience. But I must say that I consider myself very lucky with the upbringing that I had and with the opportunities that I had. And even when it was implicit, it was always clear there's there's no way that I will allow myself or have my family allow me to waste the opportunities that are handed to me with the luck of the draw, basically, that I got over a lot of people of my generation born in the sort of early mid 80s.
Yeah, which takes me to this idea of being thankful, right? And which is something that it's also a value of mine, being very thankful for what you have, right? And the opportunities you've been given.
Yes, absolutely. But also kind of, in a way, the gratefulness, I would say, that you're describing to me really translates into a drive that has sort of translated into my CV of sort of constantly pushing myself to the next thing, and really trying to make, again, the most of the opportunities that are available to me and to people that are lucky enough to grow up in free societies, and in societies that value meritocracies and are not oppressive in any way. So yeah, it's really that, I would say that that's what it really distills down to, the upbringing that I had.
Got
for
it.
sure.
You studied political science, English linguistics, and public law.
Yeah.
Not communications, not business.
No.
However, you are now chief communications officer for ON, and you've had a brilliant career in the communications and public affairs sector. So, do you think that that was the right preparation, and how did you end up in comms?
So when I started out in thinking about a career, I, as you mentioned, I moved to university in Germany. I went to Heidelberg, and the European university system is obviously very different than the college system in the US. So very early on, you have to pick your profession basically before you start university. It's not like you do a bachelor degree and then you figure out later what you want to do. It's more like you got to pick and choose what you want to do. Do you want to do medicine? Like at 18 years old, you want to do medicine? You want to do law? Anything in between? What is it? So in those early days, naive as any 18-year-old would be, I always dreamt about going into diplomacy, working for for government entities or for international entities, typical teenage political being, work for the United Nations, stuff like that. So that's how I came to sort of choose political science as my major. And then English linguistics kind of came easy to me, to be honest. It was just an easy minor pick. And public law, the second minor that I had, just complemented my major very well. So that was the combination that led me through my university years. And during my studies, I remained very steadfast in I want to go into diplomacy. I want to go into public service. And then I tried to enter that field through internships in various areas, did a bunch of them in those early years. That's also like the odd years, right? The odd years were, at least in my experience in Germany, they were very much centered around doing a lot of internships, unpaid, getting to know the space, building a reputation of, and also experience of what you do and what you can do. And I ended up going to Berlin for an internship in the strategy department of the Free Democratic Party of Germany, which is kind of in the US context, would be more of a almost libertarian, fiscally conservative, socially very liberal party. It was a different era. I mean, this is 20 plus years ago. The party has seen rougher times more recently. So I went into the strategy department there, worked as an intern. And then by chance, I was there at the party headquarters. The director of communications came to me one day and said, "Hey, I spoke to your boss. We're really shorthanded in the press office, like really traditional press office back in the day. And he's fine with us poaching you to come work in the press office. We think that would really be something that you would be good at. So would you be interested?" And I said, "Hey, you know what? Oh, why not? Let's do it." So I went to work in the press office, and it was basically just, I found my calling. It was, I don't want to make it seem sort of romantic, but it was really, it was, I found exactly my, my profession there. And again, this is a very different time. So I remember we faxed press releases to newsrooms, and we clipped newspaper articles from newspapers and scanned them and faxed them to party leadership.
Yes.
It was a very, very different time. But what it also gave me was at that very early part of my career. And that, by the way, that internship then led to my first full-time employment in that same press office. And the exposure that gave me, the political world, I cannot imagine a better school of hard knocks, of really getting to know the profession of being a communications person, you know, because it's so fast, it's so intense.
I'm sure you built a thick skin there.
Oh yeah, for sure. And also, you know, 100-hour weeks, no weekends. And it's kind of similar. Obviously a lot of people in our profession, they start out in agencies, right? In consulting work. And I never did that, but basically my political days were my time in consulting, because it's I would argue even more intense than consulting can be in a lot of ways, because it's politics. You get up in the morning, you turn on the radio, your work comes through the radio right at you. And all the way till you go to bed, you can't consume anything, media, conversations with friends, family, without your work coming up. That is pretty intense. It's just, you get thick-skinned for sure. You get to know a lot of topics that you have no idea about. You know, one day it's about healthcare. Next month, you're talking about nuclear energy over coal. And, you know, you have to get into the subject, distill the messaging, a lot of the things that really are craftsmanship, I would say, for communications. I really learned there. And I, for one, would say it was really the best school that I could have imagined.
Couple comments on that. My 16-year-old son, he's very interested in diplomacy as well. So I might send him your way.
Yeah, please.
For some advice.
I promise I won't dissuade him.
Exactly.
Or if you want me to dissuade him, that's fine. We can figure that out.
Let's talk about that offline. And funny that you mentioned the faxing of press releases. The other day I published a video on the third episode of the Reputation Room, and it was not the second episode of the Reputation Room, and it was this joke with Dennis Larsen about the times where we would fax press releases, and then he added, "Did you ever have a BlackBerry? Did you use a BlackBerry?"
That was my Goldman years. Yeah.
So same generation.
Yes, for sure. I mean, that just very quickly, I just have, from that time in politics also, there's like so many amazing anecdotes. And one of those anecdotes is we were on an election campaign, very intense, and I was with the party chair on a campaign tour. And we had, you know, one of those, you know, limousines that typical politicians travel in, not too much security, but it was like a small little convoy. And the press officers sat or rode with the party chairman, right? And so we sat next to each other in the back. And in the middle console in those days, we had a fax machine. And it was like thermal paper, that old thermal paper that now you get receipts with.
Yes.
So a roll of paper was in there. And our press office in Berlin, in party headquarters, used to print out newswire articles and newswire posts coming out during the day and send them to us. And they kind of had a messy day, and they didn't send some for a couple of hours. And then they sent a stack through one fax. And this whole roll of fax machine thermal paper just kept coming out. And I was, I had like this whole huge mountain of thermal paper on my lap, trying to call the office and tell them stop sending more newswires. So yeah, it's quite the different day. Yeah,
absolutely. And I actually had a comment from someone on LinkedIn on that video, mentioning the sending of the faxes, and also how nerve-wracking was the waiting for the confirmation that the fax had gone through. Which was super interesting because you would just basically stand up right next to the fax machine until that piece of paper would come out, right?
Yes,
Anyway, so Adib, politics is a probably great lab, right? And for you to learn lots of things, as you said, it's been an amazing school and learning experience. What did it teach you that corporate communications can't?
I don't think it was anything that corporate communications, a good corporate communications organization, and especially, by the way, boss. I must say I was always very lucky to have very, very good leaders in politics and in corporate communications. I just think it's more rounded, the experience that I got, than what I would have gotten from corporate communications. And corporate communications, then you're in a specific sector or market or whatever, and your expertise is built, probably if you start out there, is built in that sector. I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily. It's a more narrow, albeit probably deeper expertise than sort of being a more well-rounded communications professional. In a lot of ways, I think what my political time gave me was the flexibility of going to corporate communications in the financial services world, for a media publishing house, and now for a sportswear brand, and being able to bring my expertise and my craft and my philosophy of how reputation is built and managed to all of these sectors and businesses, because the underlying craft, the underlying philosophy doesn't change because of the sector. And that was something that I got the very early days. The other thing that I would also say is politics gave me the opportunity very early on, from the first day that I was employed full time, to have exposure to the decision makers, to executives, to people who actually then call the shots, right? So party leadership, and then being able very early on to shed off or not even develop any fear of talking truth to power.
Yeah,
I think that is it cannot be undervalued, the importance of that ability for communications professionals.
I was going to say, you've been in politics, then financial, media, now consumer, 4 different categories, and very different relationships to reputation, What's one thing that you've carried across all of these different experiences?
Can I ask one question before I answer?
Sure.
What do you mean different relationships to reputation?
Well, the reputation in very different contexts.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. I think for me, the through line is, if you boil it down, reputation is essentially the same, no matter what sector or category you work in. You have to boil it down. If you get too almost cute, it's not going to be to your advantage long term, especially in the media landscape that we have today. I mean, that's as well, like we talked about, I started out when there were faxes. It was very different media landscape than it is today, but everything that was true then is even more true now. Reputation is the perception of an institution or a person or anything in between with target audiences that are relevant. In order to manage that reputation, there are certain philosophies that I've learned very early on that I would apply, and we can talk about all of them.
Yes.
I'm happy to. And the more I think back across my entire career, all of those philosophies, all of those strategies of how to manage the perception that others have of you are true across the categories.
Mm-hmm.
There's no specific strategy that I would say is more true in corporate communications in one sector over the other. Of course, there are differences with regards to B2B brands, B2C brands. I totally understand that. But, we're talking about reputation, not necessarily sort of brand awareness or brand reception. I think that's a very different conversation. There are obviously very different ways of positioning, for example, a global sportswear brand with the end consumer than you would a Goldman Sachs with a very narrow target audience of possible clients. There's obviously differences, but that's not what I understand as reputation. That's brand. That's brand perception, brand awareness, brand positioning.
Mm-hmm.
Reputation is, if I ask you, what do you think of On? That you not only have an experience in product, but you have a perception of what the company stands for, what the company does, and who the company tries to speak to. If you have an abstract understanding of that, then I've created a reputation with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of things go into that. Again, for a B2C brand, it's much more complex because every retail experience, every bad product experience is going to go into the reputation of the company.
Yeah.
But again, what corporate communications does is bigger picture. It sets the scene. It sets the foundation on which then brand and product and anything from the retail experience to e-com to supply chain, everything has to deliver on the promise of the company narrative, so to speak, that has been laid as a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think that those principles hold true across categories.
We'll talk about this definition. The corporate communications builds the foundation in the form of a narrative that then every single department across the company delivers on, right? Whether it's marketing, sales, retail,
Sure.
etc. Right? We'll talk more about that. Before we get to On and your journey with On, You were at DWS, and there you merged marketing and communications into a single function.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Sure. That was my last stop within the financial services world. DWS is an asset manager now. I believe over $1 trillion in assets under management, so quite sizable. And also, by the way, in specific markets, also a B2C brand, but mostly a B2B organization.
Mm-hmm.
In that context and at that time, it really made a lot of sense, again, from a reputation building perspective, to say, what does marketing actually try to achieve for a B2B brand such as DWS at the time? So we pretty quickly came to the decision that communications drives the narrative. And for a B2B brand such as this asset manager, marketing needs to translate that narrative and basically tell the same story. And it all needs to be connected. We weren't a company that has millions of touch points with millions of customers. So we needed that different approach of really joining forces and ensuring that one voice, which is one of the principles that I always adhere to,
Mm-hmm.
speak with one voice, was translated organizationally into one joint a department that between communications, marketing, and public affairs, by the way, as well, which hadn't even previously existed at DWS. So we built that up. Communications existed, marketing joined forces with communications, and we built public affairs next to it. That the narrative setting was also translated through all channels, through all available channels, in order to get to a place where a company that is not maybe front and center and above the perception threshold of media on a constant basis,
Yeah.
or in social media, that you get the biggest return on your investment in what you're putting into communications. It was in the end, it was the play of, we're a B2B brand and we need to make sure that one voice translates into the biggest bang for the buck. And that's why let's join forces between communications and marketing, and own everything across earned, owned, and paid channels.
Yes, got it. And then you go from DWS to Axel Springer. And
Yes.
in that world, with a CEO who is himself a public figure, right?
Yes.
How
Very much
does
so.
how does your job change?
I mean, it couldn't have changed more, and it was a fascinating time for me. It was a fascinating challenge that I just could not say no to at the time. Matthias Döpfner had reached out, who's a CEO and also now majority owner of Axel Springer. He'd reached out because he was looking for somebody to come in and really help manage communications for him in a context that really had also changed for Axel Springer. It was more international. There was a lot of U.S. focus after the acquisition of Politico, and he wanted somebody who could really help him strategize around communications decisions. And it was a very different proposition than what I had before, right? In communications and marketing at DWS, that was 100 plus people in the team. A lot more sort of managing day-to-day, really executing. And it felt massively enticing to go work for somebody who was such a relevant individual, such a prominent person, and work on strategy. And it was just a fascinating experience. and I wouldn't miss it for the world. It was very different. By the way, there's also a meta like level of difference in experience, because I worked in financial services before, and in politics before that, and then you move to a media publishing house doing communications for that publishing house. So all of a sudden, you know, my external stakeholders, the journalists, were peers of the people who work in my company. Before that, like with financial services professionals, they heard a journalist's voice. They kind of, you know, please talk to communications. Here, you have a journalist talking to a journalist. And all of a sudden they feel like, yeah, look, we're of the same profession. We have a certain rapport. Let's talk to each other. And all of a sudden it becomes actually more difficult to manage reputation when you're communicating for a media publishing house. It's not only, that's not an Axel Springer issue, by the way. You see it across the board. Media publishing houses, they tend to be pretty leaky.
Yeah. And I was going to say, what were you trying to accomplish at Axel Springer? What was the expectation from you?
Well, I really came in at a transitional period for them. They had acquired Politico, and they had almost, I would say, they needed to introduce themselves to a US audience, not a B2C audience, but kind of within the Acela corridor between Boston and Washington, DC, that professional universe of media, business, politics. They needed to introduce themselves as a European powerhouse that is here to stay, and what the values are of the company. And do that while they had significant legacy business in Europe and in Germany specifically. That was a not insignificant reputational risk at the time. So it was, let's stabilize and limit and clean up any risk that we might have, and then build up the reputation in the new market, in the new significant market in the US. That was the brief.
So interesting. Let's go back to the to your philosophies behind reputation, because something you mentioned when we were preparing for today's episode, you mentioned that you try to get to the definition of reputation that matters to that brand or that company. Specifically, do you have a process? Do you have a framework, or I guess you can call it also a philosophy behind it that you've been using consistently?
A lot of those philosophies have been sort of very much consistent throughout my career, I would say, and obviously have developed as I've sort of added responsibilities, etc. I mean, I didn't start out with the level of responsibilities that I have now, obviously, but so to your question specifically, what's the process? In my view, what I really want to do, I tried to do as well when I came to On, is you really got to be in listening mode. This far from a startup, you know, it's an organization of 4,000 plus employees, over 3 billion Swiss francs in revenue last year, and listed in New York on stock exchange. So very, very significant global business already. And there's a lot of existing narratives. There's narratives that people have in their minds, executives talk to, marketing uses, brand uses, that you can see reflected in some level or another with external target audiences, with internal target audiences, with staff. And what I really try to do, and I try to do here as well, is understand what those building blocks are of the narrative that is existing, and try to give order to it, right? in order to make sure that that you're not coming in and changing the narrative of the company. That's not the job. The job is to distill the story of the company into a narrative that everybody can get behind and that everybody can identify with internally. And that everybody, and here's one of those important philosophies, can repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And the second philosophy that I mentioned before already, that everybody can speak to with one voice. One voice means that you don't have one person talking, but that everybody who talks about the company and talks about the narrative of the company is basically telling the same story.
Mm-hmm. Consistency.
Right. Consistency. So there's consistency and there's no such thing as redundancy in communications. That is definitely a takeaway from very early on in my career in politics. You basically need your stomp speech. In politics, it's a stomp speech. The politician kind of has their complete construct of their political program, their political position, and whatever the topic, whatever the subject, they come back to their stomp speech or elements of it. The same principle is true. Again, if you boil it down, same principle is true in corporate communications. The sort of construct that we have is a messaging house, which means that the order that we try to give to the narrative, a key narrative on top, maybe even a vision on top of that, and building blocks of how we tell that key narrative, that is the stomp speech of a company. Every executive should know that by heart if you wake them up at 3 a.m. If you send them into an interview, the ideal standard in my mind, really, Javier, is if I sent my founders or CEOs or any of the other executives that we have into an interview, and I don't even need to prepare them because they have the messaging house so instilled in their brain that, and they're trained so well through their lifelong experience working in companies of this size or similar size, that they know how to pivot to the narrative that we want to say. And then it becomes very authentic.
So now imagine that I'm a CNBC TV news anchor.
Sure.
And you are representing you are on spokesperson.
Mm-hmm.
What does on stand for?
On was built on an idea that the sportswear space needs more innovation, that it had become stale. And we took that idea of innovation to a radical level, introducing holes into the soles of your running shoes. And that was our start, but we kept going from there. We are obsessive on creating sportswear that help people move and experience movement in a way that feels liberating, that feels enticing, that feels good. And we do that for professional athletes. We do that for dedicated sports enthusiasts. And we do that for the entire world.
I just put you on the spot and you did a really good job.
It's the 3 a.m. moment. And even while I was saying it, I was like, okay, that wasn't perfect. It's not 100% what I would say if you tried me again. But this is the point. It doesn't have to be 100%.
Yes.
If you know what you're saying and you can get to that 95%, you've done your job. That to me is already a good engagement point in the larger scheme of things.
Yes.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about that. Reputation is built obviously over a very long time. And you're never going to always be 110% on message. One voice means if you get everything above 90%, I'm a happy man.
Good. Adib, your current CEO and executive team, which you are part of, what
Mhm.
are what are they most interested in about your job and your team?
It's a fascinating question. Uh, I think, look, the context of On is again kind of a unique one
Mhm.
in the course of my career. I report to the founders, who are also the co-CEOs, Casper and David. There's a third founder who's also in there, but he's not serving as co-CEO. Um, and they built this company from scratch, right? They built it from nothing. Communications is a very young function
Mhm.
for On. It wasn't really a thing before the IPO in New York 5-ish years ago. Communications was seen as an arm of marketing because we
Mhm.
were a B2C brand, we were a startup. Everything is PR, so to speak, right?
Exactly, I was
Everything
going to
is a
say.
product placement. Everything is talking about product. It's not talking about, again, like the overall structure of we are a company built on innovation, and that innovation leads to product, and look at this amazing product. It's a very different time. And so the conversations that I have with them are really cool because we're building something and we're building it together. I come in with expertise, and they come at it with the experience that they've had building On from nothing to a well over 10 billion valuation company. So it's extremely fruitful. I've been challenged in ways that I hadn't been challenged before from a more traditional managerial,
Yeah.
CVs. Not saying that in a disparaging way. Um, I've learned a tremendous amount from all of my bosses and from all my CEOs. But it's just a very different experience that I've had over the last year plus. And they're not afraid of making decisions. That's actually something that is also was very much the case at Axel Springer with Matthias Döpfner. He was not afraid of making a decision. Even if that meant that 6 months down the road, he would look back and say, I was wrong. And that is in my view, is a tremendous power to have as an executive. And it's a tremendous asset to have in my role. If you have an executive who thinks like that. Because in my view, the worst thing that you can do in communications is being so reluctant to make a decision that you end up saying nothing, and that you end up whitewashing every sentence, and not taking any kind of risk. And I've been enjoying that throughout my career. Basically, over the last 10 plus years, every CEO that I worked for had that trait in them.
So you are more of a better sorry than safe person.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I wouldn't even say that that's two sides to the same.
Yeah,
It's not
coin.
one or the other. It's not binary. You can be safe and bold at the same
And
time.
decisive.
Exactly. I mean, and look at the media landscape that we're living in now. So, okay, abundance, information overflow, massively fast paced. Let's not even get started on social media and what that means, and that whole sort of democratization of not only information but opinion and all of that. What moves the needle in that media landscape? Is it kind of the quote unquote safe play, or is it being authentic and standing for something and being believable, because what you say is what you do, and because you put your money where your mouth is? And that is, to me, by the way, also a very strategic nature of communications. If communications is not involved in those strategic decision makings, then guess what happens? You don't know what the boldness of the company strategy is, or you're not involved, ingrained in the strategic decision making of the company. You're gonna become very, very bland in the narrative and the messaging, because you just communicate what's right in front of you.
Yeah.
Cannot imagine anything more boring in today's day and age.
I strongly believe that we do, especially in the corporate world, we do need people who have that better sorry than safe attitude towards work. That's for sure. And in regards to what you were saying now, it's this corporate speak cliche type language versus being authentic and using storytelling. And speaking of storytelling, I know you're big on storytelling.
Yeah.
And I had a question for you about it, because I think you actually have written about storytelling in a couple instances. So I want to think that On is the perfect brand to leverage the muscle, right? From a storytelling perspective. What role does that play in your current vision for the team?
Look, I think storytelling is, to me, is the execution of a proactive reputation management that is based on one voice and repetition, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I mean? So you've set your narrative, you've defined your narrative, and you've also agreed with anybody who needs to be involved that you're going to speak with one voice towards that narrative. Then the execution part of that is that you have to find moments to tell that narrative through stories, because that's what makes them real, right? If I keep telling you that elevator pitch that you had me do before, right, on who is on, it's going to get boring pretty quick. What's going to bring it to life is storytelling. How do you guys create innovative products? How do you guys obsess over iterating towards the next big thing? How do you expand in global markets because you want to be a global sportswear player? You have to, in a weird way, all of those stories are proof points of your overarching narrative.
Yes.
Right? And so anything and everything should be considered storytelling. The people that we hire, the talent that we look for, the offices that we have, how they look, how they feel, how the culture is, how we do R&D. We have 1,200 employees in Zurich, in our global headquarters where I am right now. You wouldn't believe the work that we do in R&D within the company. We don't just go somewhere and source something that somebody else did and pack a logo on it and say, here's On. It's like, it's actual work being done, innovative work being done, really creating new spaces in sportswear since day one. And you cannot tell those stories enough. And those stories basically tell the story of your narrative.
Yeah. It brings it to life.
It brings it to life. And by the way, also, if you think about it from a very corporate angle, how many corporate moments do you have to actually talk about your narrative? It's not that many if you think about it. Okay, so we're a listed company. We have 4 quarterly earnings. And then, you have the odd event here or there. And the rest of it is kind of, there is not much more to like a traditional corporate calendar that are like repeat moments.
Yeah.
So you got to go out proactively within the organization, work with the organization to build a proactive calendar of moments to do storytelling.
And
Those can be linked to anything. As I said, they can be linked to product, they can be linked to culture, they can be linked to whatever. I don't care. But does it help you tell your narrative? If yes, do it. If no, don't.
Yes.
That's the essence to me. And by the way, another philosophy to me is, especially this day and age, with the age of LLMs and geo at the rise and AI, it's even more true now than it was maybe 5 years ago, when it was already very true. Spikes are a great thing. Those viral moments where something goes, above and beyond what you could have possibly hoped for, and you create that wow moments through something that your company's done. I mean, this was before I joined. This was when at the Paris Olympics in 24, they introduced light spray, that technology of a robot arm basically spraying the upper of a running shoe within 3 minutes, really dissolving the traditional manufacturing process from multiple hours and 200 individual steps to 3 minutes. That was an amazing viral moment for On. That was a spike. How do you follow up on that? And I think that is where by the way, also communications professionals who think like that and who go in the organization and find those stories and build that calendar and tell those stories to target audiences are extremely vital. Because if you then just have that viral moment, you have that spike, and then you go away and nothing comes after it, that's no way to manage and control your narrative and to manage your reputation. Managing your reputation means having constant small spikes of stories that you're telling.
I love that. I was going to say it's finding the next spike, right?
It's finding the next spike, but I don't even want to find that next huge spike. Even if it's a small wave, give me the next small wave. What's the story today? What's the story next week? What's the story 3 weeks from now?
Yeah.
One of them spikes, fantastic. 90% of them are just a small wave, but they do create content out there from third parties talking about basically your narrative. That adds to your reputation, every single small wave. And if you skip those waves, you're not going to build a strong enough reputation that holds over time. We
have a few more minutes, and I don't want to let you go without asking about Roger Federer, one of my heroes. He's obviously publicly has been and is publicly connected to the brand. How is the relationship with him? How do you guys think about him, if at all, from a strategic perspective?
Maybe let me answer that on multiple levels.
Yes.
So Roger Federer was an early adopter to On, and then through wearing the product, connected with the founders. And there's this great anecdote where they met for dinner, they had a great time, and then they followed up because they wanted to work together, and the founders emailed Roger and basically said, look, we can't afford to pay you, but here's an idea, you pay us, which was basically their way of saying, invest into On.
A stake.
And that's what he did. And the rest is history in a way. He's a co-entrepreneur in that sense. So he holds a stake in On. He also was very important in the development of our business into tennis product.
Yes.
As from a credibility perspective, from a validation perspective, from a product development perspective, and he's here in that capacity on a very regular basis. You just you'll see him in the office. You'll see him just with a regular employee badge, working on some next generation tennis products and giving his feedback to the team, which is obviously like extremely vital from a legend such as Roger himself. And so from that business and that business dimension, he's been very important for a considerable period of time. From a communications perspective, he gave us a huge boost back then when he did take a stake in On. Again, validation, credibility, reach, headlines. I mean, today I can't begin to tell you the amount of headlines that we get when they talk about On. They say the Roger Federer backed sportswear brand On, right? So that was a very conscious decision back in the day. From our brand awareness today, do we still need that element of it in communications? No, we don't. But are we very happy to also work closely with Roger on various topics, from marketing campaigns all the way to like communications, relevant events, community events that we do across the world, and working with them closely on those, and also co-engaging with media on the ideas of On and the values of On and the sort of trajectory of On. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a massive asset.
How unprofessional would it be if you are an average On employee and asking for an autograph or a picture when he's around?
I mean, I'm not that person, but I mean, he's so laid back. He's so relaxed. It's all of the athletes that we have under contract. I mean, this obviously Roger is a very unique proposition to On, but like even in the tennis space, Ben Shelton was here the other day.
Yes.
In the running space, Helena Beery, who won the New York Marathon in record time, a record that stood over, I guess, 20 years or something, and did it in light spray shoes. She was here in the office the other day, and they're all so approachable, and so it's really amazing
Very nice
to see these people sort of when they're quote unquote off.
Very nice. So, Adib, we are about to finish, and before we do so, I wanted to ask you, is there anything we have not discussed that you'd like to address?
No, I think I think these conversations can obviously, and unfortunately, I tend to talk a long time, so I do apologize for that. But we could spend another episode probably talking about the media landscape of today and what LLMs and geo is doing to reputation management. Right? It's a fascinating area for me. We could probably talk another 30 minutes about the strategic importance of having a strong communications department in a company that is intertwined in decision making, has a seat at the table, knows about things before they're decided and not informed of decisions. Those things are principally important. So those are part of the principles that I mentioned before. But I think if we think about where we are today in 2026 and where our profession is going to go in the future and how reputation management is going to look like, I mean, 10 years from now, I have zero idea, but how it's going to look like 3 to 5 years from now. Yeah, I mean, we could see each other again for multiple episodes.
I'll take you up on that offer. Let's agree on a part 2 of this conversation for sure.
Let's do it.
Because you gave me some good fodder there for a second episode or for a part 2. How can people find you, Adib?
On LinkedIn is probably the easiest and fastest. I I try to read all my messages. That's how you and I connected, if I remember correctly. So LinkedIn is probably the best way. And if you're ever in Zurich, shoot me a message, ideally on LinkedIn or through email, adib.sisani@on.com, and swing by and visit the On Labs.
I can attest that Adib, yes, and I can attest that Adib is very responsive on LinkedIn, because that's, as he said, that's how I reached out to him. So my headline for today is a simple, but I think one that is gonna resonate big time with all of you, which is there is no such thing as redundancy in comms. Adib,
couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much. This was as rich and fun as I expected, and then some. And everybody else, thank you so much for listening. If you guys enjoyed the conversation, please make sure to subscribe and share with your network. Thank you, and until next time.